Welcome to the Suspense Squad, where authors interview authors. Today we have the fabulous Lenora Worth. And we are going to be talking about her latest release. Lenora, would you show us the book?
Comes out in February.
Ooh.
Amish Country Secret.
Okay, would you read us the back cover blurb, please?
Sure. This murder witness is returning home with a secret somebody wants to bury. With a head out on her life, Samantha Herndon escapes to the one place she knows she'll be safe, her Amish grandmother's empty home. But when a tornado flings her car into Micah King's field, her plans for solitary refuge end. This Amish bachelor knows the Englisher is trouble, but he's falling for her anyway. Can Micah keep Samantha alive and convince her to stay?
Oh.
And she has a little dog with her named Patch.
Oh, my niece's dog is named Patches.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's like a little terrier, and he's got black around one eye, so she calls him Patch.
Cute.
I love a good dog in the story.
I know I warned him on the cover, but that didn't happen, but that's okay.
Well, at least he didn't get a snake like Kate Nolan.
Goodness. So that's the premise. That's how it gets started. A tornado lands her in his field.
So coming from Kansas, I'm a Kansas girl. Hate tornadoes. No, just no.
Yeah, I grew up in Georgia, and we had quite a few, and then living in Louisiana for 30 years, we had quite a few there too. So not my favorite thing to do.
All right, we have a few questions for you.
Okay.
And we will start with Hope.
Hey, well, hi, Lenora. I've never met you before.
Hi.
As you can tell from my accent, I'm a Southern girl too. I actually live in Georgia.
All right.
And so I heard you're from Georgia, so yeah.
Yes, I grew up in Southwest Georgia.
Okay, well, I'm in the Northeast corner, so we're completely opposite.
Okay.
But I would love to know how you got started with writing. What prompted you? What inspired you to start writing?
Okay, so when I was about 6, I told my mother I wanted to be a Secret Service agent. And she said, Lenora, they have guns and you could get shot. And I said, okay. And so then I went to school, and about the 4th grade, a teacher gave us a writing assignment, and I loved it. I mean, everybody else was groaning, but I loved it. And so from that day forth, I knew I wanted to write books, and I would tell everybody in my family I want to write books. And I would I had about 20 nieces and nephews because I was the baby of 7 children. I'd gather them all up at family gatherings, and I'd tell them all these stories. So that's how I got started. And then we moved to Atlanta after we were married, and I knew I wanted to write, and I just kept typing away, writing this awful melodrama that to this day has not been published. But anyway, in 1993, I pitched a book in New Orleans at RWA to an editor for Avalon, which was a subscription type books back then. I think they only went to libraries and like a book club, but they bought my first book. I wrote 3 books for Avalon, and then I wrote 2 for Leisure. And then my then agent told me about Steeple Hill, that it was a new line opening up at Harlequin, and she got me one of the last appointments in Dallas at RWA with the editor who was starting the line. And I was so nervous. I had my pitch typed and I'm trying to read it. And I'm like this. She said, just give it to me. I'll read it. So she read it. And she said, send me the first 3 chapters and a proposal. So I did. Like 3 weeks later, I got a call. They bought it. And I've been there ever since. That was 1996. I've been with Love Inspired ever since. So and I've written for Harlequin and HarperCollins. I now work for Lee. They're a smaller publisher out of California, started by a group of authors, and various indie projects, short stories, you name it, I'll write it. Also work for magazines and newspapers too. So
I knew in elementary school I wanted to write too. So yeah, Sometimes you
did.
get called early and sometimes it's later in life. So
I actually sold short stories on the playground for $0.25 apiece. Would pass them around because, they'd spend $1.25 and they'd pass them around. So that worked out good for me. I had milk money.
I
Awesome.
love that.
It is awesome.
That's how
I
I
used
got
to, I used to write breakup letters for my friends.
I love that.
They want to break up with their boyfriends. They didn't know how to tell them. So I'd be like, Shannon, will you write the letter?
Oh, that's
Now
funny.
that is cool.
All right. Dana, I think you had kind of a follow-up question to that. You want to ask yours?
Yeah, because Lenora, you and I have known each other for quite a while,
Yes,
and we're like shoe buddies, I guess.
that's right.
I remember, I think it was last year or 2 years ago at RWA or something. We were talking about writing Amish
Yes.
with a Love Inspired and Love Inspired Suspense. And I
Yes.
just remember you had such a cool story on how you started with the Amish. So I wondered if you'd share that.
Yeah, it was a cool story. I never dreamed I'd write Amish. I mean, I read a lot of Amish books, a lot of books that I love that some of my friends write. But I had sent in some proposals and it wasn't going very well. It's like, no, no, no. And I'm like, I told my husband, I said, well, my career's over and I'll just work in a shoe store and I'll read all the books I have in my home that I've been wanting to read. I said, let's go for a walk on the beach. So he took me to the beach and I'm walking along and I'm thinking, Lord, I don't know what to do. I love writing, but I know that's not, I can live without writing. And in my head, I'm thinking, not. So I get this image of a man walking along a road and he was Amish. And I'm like, excuse me? And then I told my husband, I just had this idea. It just came in my head. And I turned to my husband and I stopped and I said, I think I have an idea. He said, well, what is it? I said, an Amish Navy SEAL. And he said, excuse me? And he says, that a thing? I said, I think it could be a thing. And so I came home and I immediately emailed Patience, my editor, and I said, I've got one more idea and you're probably going to laugh. And I tried to write and I couldn't. I just sat here kind of, what am I going to do? Well, my laptop dinged and it was Patience. And she said, Melissa's going ballistic in a good way. She wants you to see the proposal. I'm like, what? So I sent a proposal and Patience, my agent called me and she said, well, they're offering you 6 books. And I said, what? So then,
Wow.
okay, God, thank you. Now, how am I going to write this book? I looked up on my shelf and I had gotten this little book one time at a retreat, and it was A Pocket Guide to Amish Life by Mindy Starts Clark. And when I looked up and saw that little book, I thought, I knew I kept that for a reason. And that very day, in my inbox, I had decided to name the hero Jeremiah. And that very day, when I read my inbox prayer, it was from the book of Jeremiah.
Wow.
And
That-
That's amazing.
That's amazing. That is a good story.
Yeah, it
So
is.
I wrote it, and it went on to be nominated for a Rita. Didn't win, but it was nominated. And I think all of my books, are not that great, but I think out of all my books, that's probably the best one as far as how I felt about it and how it made it. It healed Jeremiah and it healed me because he had to come home. He had to start all over. He had to go through baptism and he had to put God first before he put the woman he loved first. And that was the lesson he had to learn before he could win her back, had turned back to God and his people. So the whole series is started with him, and he passes through each book. Even this one kind of sums them all up, and every character is in this book that is in the series. They all wind up helping her. And so it was a nice journey, and I really enjoyed it. With the second book, I went back to the beach and I'm lying there and I'm reading and I'm thinking, God, I don't know if I can do it again. I liked the first one, but did everybody else? And what am I going to do? Well, I look up and there's an Amish woman walking on the beach. And I blink and I'm like, I didn't bring anything to drink with me except water. I don't know what's going on. And I look and she's still there and she's walking toward me. She's smiling. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to move because she might just disappear. But she was to me and I smiled at her and she smiled at me. And she went up on this boardwalk and sat down and she had a little prayer book. And I looked around and smiled and she smiled. And then I went back to read my book. And then I looked around again and she was gone. I don't know where she went. But I came home and I told my husband, you know what we say in Georgia? Y'all ain't gonna believe this.
I'm still shaking that you thought your career was over because you can't write Amish. I mean, I'm like, what?
I know, you know, God has a sense of humor with me. That's how it got going.
That's
I
amazing.
just love that story.
That's a
I
great
just-
story.
A lot of people, everybody's heard that story. You know me and my stories, but everybody always wants to hear more about it. So
That's the first time I've heard it.
That's the first time I've heard it.
Yeah, me too.
Great.
Awesome.
Yeah, first time I've heard it
It's gonna be
also.
like, I'm not always at the beach, Lenora. Go.
in fact, I was just talking to somebody this week, another interview I did, and I told her, I said, whenever I can't figure out what to do, I just go to the beach. I used to, I would walk around the neighborhood and talk to myself, and, you know, the neighbors would run from me like, oh, but anyway, they knew I was a writer, and they just say, that it's okay, she's a writer. So anyway,
I love it when God orchestrates that, those
know.
moments in our lives, and then He blesses it and brings it to fruition. I just think that's amazing.
Yes,
It's so personal, isn't it?
yes, and I never forget that. I never do.
Mm.
Ginger has a question for you. However, we are all very controversial on this question, so I can't wait to hear your answer.
Okay.
Well, my question is about your process. We know that you put out a ton of books a year, and I just know that you have got your process down to a T, and I would love to know what it is. We, you know, I know we all have our own processes, but I'd love for you to talk about yours.
Well, first I pray a lot. I mean, whenever I start a new book, I always pray over my laptop and just, God, give me the words and just let the energy come through my fingers and let me type what you want me to type. And that's the beginning of every process. But my daily process is I'm really a lazy writer, because I might look at a couple of catalogs, you know, shoes, and I might, you know, see a book I haven't read yet and start reading a little bit of it, or have another cup of coffee. But I like to be before my husband retired, I would get up really early and write from like 9 to 3, and everybody would come home, and that I'd go back maybe after dinner. But now he's been retired a few years, and we don't have to get up as early. I'm usually in my office by 11. And then I stay in here till at least 5, sometimes 5:30 or 6, like now. And what I do, I try to get at least 5 or 6 pages a day, or at least 1,500 words. And sometimes I'm writing 2 books at once. So sometimes I'll write one in the afternoon, work on one in the afternoon, or one in the morning, or come back at night and work a little bit. I did not used to work on weekends, but since I've been writing double time a lot, I'll work a couple hours on Saturday and a couple hours on Sunday afternoon. And by then my brain has had enough for one week, and I start putting the wrong characters in the wrong book. So it's hard to explain that to my editor, like, who's Fred? And I'm like, I don't know. It's a daily process. As I said, I'm not a very disciplined person, you know, housekeeping, blah. But writing,
I love
I'm
you. That's awesome.
I mean, the only time I do housekeeping is when I'm avoiding writing, and I'm like, I'm going to go scrub the sink, or I'm going to wash 8 loads of clothes, and because I'm avoiding something. And But no, I think that whatever process works for you, mine is, and I don't do like a big outline. I'm very organic, like my guy walking down the road, Jeremiah. But the thing about me is a little weird and it's a little hard to explain. When I get an image like that, a scene like that in my head, I also get the whole book in my head. I mean, it's not every little thing, but I can see all the big moments. I could see him walking toward home. I could see him talking to the bishop. And the bishop says, Jeremiah, you did not come back for her. You came back for God. And he's like, yes. And then when he leaves the bishop's office, he says, but I'm going to get her too. I'm going to get her back. So that, I saw that. I saw the first time she saw him. I saw what he did in the book to redeem himself. All of those things flashed through my head. And then I have to figure out how to piece those together like a puzzle, like walking across a drawbridge, a rope bridge, and some of the ropes are missing. How am I going to do that? And I got to quit talking with my hands, but that's how I do it. I mean, it's a process, and some days it's slow, some days it's a little faster. Some days the words just fly, and some days I just stare out the window. I'm like, I got nothing, and I'm sure you all have days like that too. So, but that's how I do it. I'm just steady. I'm steady.
Do you write in
Awesome.
scenes or do you write linear?
I write linear. I cannot stand to not, Ginger. And again, this is a weird thing that I do. I write linear, I write chronologically, and I cannot move on to the next chapter till I've at least edited the one I left a couple of times. And I'll add, maybe take out, maybe look at a sentence and say, what did that mean? Or what happened there? And then usually around chapter 10, I just stop and go, okay, something's not right. And then I start all over again and I read through the whole thing again. And I usually, if something's off with the motivation or the conflict, I can usually find it back in chapter 3, 4, or the beginning. I didn't set it up the way I should have. So that I start all over again if I have time. And in the books that I haven't had time, I can tell, I should have just started all over again. So that's part of my process too. It's go back, start at the beginning. And you might have seen me give people this advice on the Love Inspired Loop when they're having trouble. And I'll tell them, you don't have writer's block. You just have something that's blocking your writing. It's not you, it's the story. So you go back, you start all over, you find that piece of the puzzle. That has worked for me for 27 years, something like that. And very few times that I've gotten stuck to the point that I can't move forward.
Well, I feel a little vindicated that Lenora Worth is a procrastinator, just like I am. So there we go.
I have to warm up. You're in good company.
All right, Darlene, I think you have our last question.
In your spare time, Lenora, do you have any special hobbies that you enjoy to do?
Sleeping. I love to read, of course, like we all do. I like to bake. I like to cook when I have time. My husband cooks now, thank goodness. And it smells wonderful right now. I think he's making stroganoff. I like to bake cakes and sweets and things I don't really need to eat, but I have a big, big sweet tooth. That's always fun. I love to walk on the beach, of course. I love to walk. I grew up on a farm, so I walked the country roads a lot and rode my bike. And I like the outdoors to a certain extent, but because I grew up in the outdoors, I know what's out there. So sometimes I just like to watch the outdoors, just sit and watch the water or sit and watch the snow or the rain. Or there's nothing to me more wonderful than a good book on a rainy day, a good cup of coffee, and some chocolate, of course. And I'm happy. And of course I go shoe shopping, Dana,
So how many pairs of shoes do you have?
Yes.
Well, I count them every now and then, probably at least 100, maybe more. But
You have like a wall of shoes, you know?
I
with
have
sales?
a rule about shoes. When I get a new pair, I give a pair away. I send a
Oh.
pair on to somebody else. So that's my rule. So they're coming and going. I know one time when we were moving, when we lived in Louisiana, we had some friends helping us, and one of their kids shouted, "Miss Lenore, you know you have 72 pairs of shoes." And I thought, bless his heart, he didn't find that other box.